So I know that we kind of live in a little bit of what I would consider to be a sports-crazed area, that we just really seem to like sports in this part of the country. But even with that being true, I don't know how many of you are aware, but last weekend, the New York Knicks won their first NBA championship in more than 50 years. That's the response I was expecting. No, honestly, you don't have to clap. Like, there's no need to clap for this. I just didn't know if we had any Knicks fans in here or not. And it doesn't sound like we do, which is totally fine. But if you know a Knicks fan, if you are a Knicks fan, congratulations. It doesn't sound like you're in. But if you are, congratulations. Happy for you. But even if you just know a Knicks fan, you know that it's kind of been a long and a trying road for this fan base for a really, really long time. I mean, 50 plus years is a while. You go back into the 80s, and like this was a pretty forgettable time for this team. They weren't necessarily awful, but they weren't like good either. But they were just there enough to be able to have some hope every once in a while, but not really good enough to compete. The 90s were their heyday. They were really good in the 90s. They were a championship level team, but there just happened to be this guy by the name of Michael Jordan who kind of stood in their way anytime that they got close. Then came the 2000s, and honestly, that was a rough time for the Knicks. Big expectations, big names, big contracts, but not much to show for it. And now for the last 20 years or so, they've been pretty irrelevant. Flashes of hope, but mostly disappointment. And so for decades, Knicks fans have been living in this, and whether you're a Knicks fan or a fan of another team in sports, you probably understand this a little bit. Like, they've been living in this cycle of hope to disappointment, to hope to disappointment, hope to disappointment, like over and over and over again. And as sports fans, we know that every time that our hearts get broken by our team, our hope becomes a little bit more guarded moving forward. But because of this, for the Knicks and for this particular fan base, it's like there's been this pressure that's building within them for years that's just been waiting to explode. And honestly, I kind of believe, whether the Knicks won or lost, that there was going to be some type of explosion that happened in New York City. The only question was, would it be out of celebration or would it be out of frustration? But then they won. And all those years and all that waiting and all that emotion just came pouring out. And now I have to say that there were many, many people in New York who celebrated responsibly. But then there were many, many others who left a wake of destruction behind them. Tens of thousands of people, they flooded the streets surrounding Madison Square Garden, and there were reports of people climbing vehicles, throwing objects, flipping taxis. There were clashes between fans and police, people climbing buses and even setting buses on fire, vandalizing property, and even like really, really serious incidents where people were being shot and stabbed, all in celebration. And when I hear stories like this in New York or other in other places around the country, because New York's far from the only sports town to react to a championship in this way, but oftentimes I wonder, how many people went downtown to celebrate? How many of them did so expecting to cause some sort of destruction? Or how many of them just went down there and got caught up in the moment? Like, did someone show up and they just see someone else climbing a bus and think, oh, well, that looks fun? Or do they see somebody flipping a taxi and thinking, you know what, I think I have the skills to help them accomplish their goal here. You know, I can help with this. It's the whole idea that lies behind a mob mentality. A mob mentality shows up anytime people start thinking less as individuals and start thinking more as a group. And oftentimes this will turn up emotions, lower restraint, and speed up bad ideas. It's like you have one person who climbs on top of a bus, and so 10 others are like, yeah, I'll do that too. And you have one person who starts smashing a vehicle and others join in. The crowd, in a sense, creates permission for behavior that would normally be unthinkable. But something else that happens when a mob mentality is present is that all the focus, it goes directly to the crowd, and whenever that happens, individuals can kind of become invisible. Everyone's so focused on the mob that they miss the individuals that are all around. Like, all of this was taking place in New York City. Don't you know that there was like the homeless man who sleeps at Penn Station, who was just like a few feet away? Don't you Don't you know that there was the delivery driver who was just trying to finish his shift, the sanitation worker whose job it is to clean up the mess that everybody's creating, the old elderly woman who's just trying to make her way through downtown just so she can get home, the EMT worker who's trying to make it to somebody who was injured during the celebration. But with all the coverage that this celebration received, we don't hear about the individuals who are just trying to go about life or do their job, who are interrupted by the crowd. Why? Because crowds can make people invisible. And that's exactly what happens in our text today. If you have your Bible, you can go ahead and open up to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, this passage takes place in the home stretch of Jesus' ministry. He is heading towards Jerusalem where he will ultimately be crucified. And this part of Jesus' ministry is always so fascinating to me. And I don't believe it's just fascinating to me. I think it was fascinating to the gospel writers as well, because whenever you look at their gospels, each of them use such a large percentage of their biographies of Jesus' life covering the very end of his life. But what amazes me about this, the last part of Jesus' life, is that he knew exactly what lied ahead of him. He knew that he was going to be betrayed. He knew he was going to be humiliated. He knew he was going to be abandoned. He knew he was going to be forsaken. He knew that he was going to be crucified. And with each and every passing hour, he knew that his fate was just getting closer and closer. He knew that pain was sitting on his doorstep, a relational pain, an emotional pain, a spiritual pain, and a whole lot of physical pain. But even with that being the case, he still responds with so much grace, so much compassion, and so much patience. Patience with his disciples who after 3 years were still so lost, and patience for the hurting who were just desperate for his attention. And then in Mark chapter 10, verse 35, Jesus has literally just finished telling his disciples for the third time that he's going to die, that he's going to be betrayed, and he's going to be executed. And you would think, after his disciples hearing this not once, not twice, but 3 different times, that there might have been a little bit of levity to the situation. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Because right after Jesus tells his disciples for the third time he's going to die, verse 35, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, they came to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. It's like, yeah, Jesus, we know, yeah, we hear you. The Son of Man, he's going to be handed over, betrayed, mocked, spit on, flogged, beaten within an inch of his life, and brutally murdered. But we need you to promise us that you'll do whatever we ask. And so Jesus asked them, what do you want me to do for you? I want you to hold on to this question because it's going to show up again here in just a little bit. And they replied, James and John, they replied, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in glory. In other words, give us the seats of honor in heaven. That's a pretty big request. Yeah, we know that you keep talking about all these hard things that you're about to face, but give us the most important seats in glory. And then Mark tells us that the other 10 disciples, whenever they heard this request that James and John had made, that they were furious. They were indignant because of this request that James and John had made. And there's only really 2 reasons that I can think of that they would be mad. Number one, it's like, who in the world do these guys think they are? That's the more charitable reason. Like, who in the world do these guys think they are that they are worthy of making a request like that? The second one is not quite as charitable, but probably more likely, and it's this. Why didn't we think to ask for this first? Like, that's a really good question. Like, if I would have just had a little bit of foresight, I would have thought of this first, but they didn't, and so they're mad. And so Jesus, he called the 12 disciples together and he told them this. You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them, but not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. At the cross, making their way towards Jerusalem. Whenever they come to the city of Jericho, which was about 18 miles outside of Jerusalem. Then verse 46. They came to Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man named Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. All throughout the Gospels, we we see these people that Jesus has healed again and again and again. We encounter these stories, but very rarely are we actually told the name of the person who's being healed. And this is actually one of the clearest examples of when we do. It's a blind man by the name of Bartimaeus. Mark tells us that the name Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus, but the name Timaeus means one who is honored or one who is highly valued. So the name Bartimaeus literally means like the son of honor. But you wouldn't catch that by the way that people treated him, because the crowd showed him anything but honor. They showed him anything but respect. But when Bartimaeus heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth who was coming, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more and all the louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Bartimaeus, he's been sidelined for a really, really long time, and it's like people don't even see him anymore. Now I'm going to tell you guys a story that I'm not proud of. And it's probably like my wife's least favorite sermon illustration that I'll ever share, but she's not in here, so it's okay. So several months ago, I was at work, and I came home from work, and I learned that one of my children had spilled black paint on the tan carpet in our basement. And I came home, and I saw the black paint on the tan carpet in the basement. And my blood pressure did what I'm guessing many of your blood pressure would have done. Like it just went, like just real quick, real fast, just up from zero to whatever high blood pressure is. Like it got there real fast. And I was like, I need to do something about this. We need to clean this, and we tried cleaning it. You can tell, it was tried to be cleaned. I don't know who tried to clean it, but the spread showed that somebody had tried to clean it, and it didn't really work, and it's like, okay, I need to try that again. I need to do some other tactics, or maybe I need to go, we have some extra carpet, I need to go and cut a new square out of the other carpet, so that way I can figure out how to weave this all back together. But I didn't want to watch I've had to do that before in this house, and I don't want to watch the YouTube videos about it again. So instead of doing anything about it, I went and I sat down, and I started doing something else, and I got distracted. And then I ended up going back upstairs, and it's probably dinner time or something like that. And I don't know the next time that I went downstairs. It might have been a day or 2 days later. But whenever I went back downstairs, again, I saw the stain in the carpet. And it bothered me. But it didn't bother me nearly as much as it did the first time. And it was like, okay, I still need to do something about this. And sooner or later, I'm going to do something about it. But I didn't. And now, like it's been months, I go downstairs, and I still see this disgusting stain on our carpet. But it bothers me so much less today than what it did whenever it first happened. It's like I've become used to it, right? It's like I've become desensitized to it. This stain is now just a part of the scenery in our basement. But it's like that's what was happening with Bartimaeus and the crowds. I'm sure at one point they saw him. His presence probably made them a little bit uncomfortable, but as time goes on, he just becomes part of the scenery. They don't listen to him. They don't really see him. He's just part of the background, sitting along the roadsides, begging day after day after day. But then he hears that Jesus is coming, and he starts shouting, "Jesus, son of David," this very messianic title. We talked about this a few weeks ago. This very messianic title showing that Bartimaeus believed that Jesus was the one that God's people had been waiting for generations. And so he cries out, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." And this is essentially the first of two very beautiful prayers that Bartimaeus prays during this encounter with Jesus. But as he makes his request, the crowds try to shut him down. The mob mentality is at play, because sometimes the mob mentality will cause you to do things that maybe otherwise you wouldn't do. The crowd tells him to be quiet, to stop making a scene. And who knows, maybe this is the first time in a long time that anyone's even acknowledged the son of honor sitting there, but it's not with compassion, it's with annoyance, it's with anger. To them, he doesn't matter. He's just a burden. He's a taker from society, someone who's easy to ignore. Nobody cared about his pain. Nobody except Jesus. Because verse 49 tells us that Jesus stopped. If you have a physical Bible, I would underline or circle that word stopped, because to me that's just so powerful. Jesus stopped and he called him. Jesus stopped on his way to the cross with the emotional weight that he was carrying, the spiritual weight that he was carrying, and the relational weight that he was carrying. He stopped for the man that everybody else was trying to ignore. And so the crowds called the blind man to Jesus. "Cheer up on your feet, he's calling you." And throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. It's really likely that this cloak was probably like the only thing of value that Bartimaeus even owned. It was what kept him warm at night. It would have doubled as his workspace. He probably would have laid it out on the ground as he was sitting alongside the road, as he would have sat there, and he would have, whenever people would come and they would give him coins or alms or anything like that, as they would to a beggar, the coins would be gathered on his cloak, and then he would keep it all together there. Even in Jewish law, like his cloak was protected. A poor person's cloak was protected. It was so important that if a cloak had ever been taken for collateral, it would eventually have to be returned. It wasn't disposable. It was necessary for life. Yet when Jesus called Bartimaeus, I don't want you to miss this, Bartimaeus doesn't fold it up and then gently set it aside for safekeeping, because he believes that what Jesus, the Son of David, the Messiah, can do for him is greater than any comfort or stability his cloak could ever represent. The cloak was his comfort, his security, his livelihood. And he just takes it and he throws it aside. Why? Because when you really believe Jesus can change your life, you stop clinging to what you used to depend on. And when he met Jesus, when he and Jesus meet, Jesus asks him what seems to be the question of the day. Now, Jesus is asking the son of honor the very same question that he asked James and John whenever they said, "Yeah, we want the seats of honor." Jesus asked blind Bartimaeus, "What do you want for me to do for you?" And the blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." And this is the second beautiful prayer that Bartimaeus prays in his encounter with Jesus. And it's such an appropriate prayer, right? But it's not only an appropriate prayer for the physically blind like Bartimaeus, but it's honestly a really appropriate prayer for us as well. But the question that we have to answer before we pray this prayer is, do we really want to see? Do we really want to see, do we really want to see the areas of our lives that don't align with Jesus? Do we really want to see the ways that we're not leading or loving our families the way that we've been called to? Do we really want to see the roots of our financial unfaithfulness? Do we really want to see how our bad habits are impacting those that we love? Do we really want to see how our lack of surrender, our lack of community, our lack of serving is keeping us from living the life that Jesus desires for us to live? It's a beautiful prayer, but it's a really, really scary prayer. And so Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus replied, "I want to see." So Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." And immediately Bartimaeus, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. And there is so much to process and digest in this story. Jesus, he's heading to the cross. His disciples are still so misguided in who Jesus is and what his purpose really is. You have the crowds who are close to Jesus. They're walking with Jesus, and while they're physically near Jesus, their intentions are not. You have Bartimaeus, who is rising above the voices telling him to quiet down and leave Jesus alone. You have Jesus showing his disciples in real time what was happening there at the very end of the disciples' request. He's showing them in real time what it looks like to follow him and what he means whenever he says, "Whoever wants to be great among you first must be a slave of all, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." But there are three lessons that I want to point out from this text this morning. The first one is this: don't overlook the one. Don't overlook the one. This is something that Jesus constantly modeled all throughout his ministry. He taught it all throughout his ministry. Don't overlook the one. When life gets hard, when the pain mounts, when the demands rise, when the calendar fills, whenever the pace quickens, don't overlook the one. I've heard it said, "Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone." And it's so easy to only see the masses, to only see the crowds, and to miss the impact that we could make for one. It's so easy whenever we whenever we come in contact with somebody's pain, to wonder, what are we even able to actually do? And it's so easy whenever we feel like we can't do anything significant for their pain, to convince ourselves to do nothing at all. But time and time and time again, Jesus would model and he would teach, just do something. When you encounter somebody's pain, maybe it's just sending them a text, maybe it's providing a meal, maybe it's offering to watch their kids. It could literally be anything. Maybe it's just going and quietly sitting with them and being present with them. We may not be able to fix whatever is causing their pain, but that doesn't mean that we should do nothing. Like Jesus, we cannot get so caught up in the crowds that we miss the one who is right in front of us. So we pray for the one. We reach for the one. We serve the one. We love the one. Because there's always someone who is right in front of you who needs it. The question is, do we see them? And are we listening for them? Jesus would listen for the cries of the hurting. He didn't just hear their cries, he listened for their cries. It's something completely different to listen instead of just hear. Hearing leads to feeling sorry for and feeling sad. Listening leads to actually doing something. Jesus listened. The second lesson we learn here is don't block the one. Don't block the one. Don't stand in between the hurting and Jesus. Don't discourage people who are truly seeking Jesus. It was those who were the closest to the action who were oftentimes the biggest barrier between the hurting and Jesus. Oftentimes it was the religious leaders, right? Like they would use their man-made rules and regulations to try and intimidate people from following Jesus. Other times it was Jesus' literal disciples who just couldn't quite understand Jesus' purpose and how he was accomplishing it. Over and over again throughout Mark's gospel, the people closest to Jesus often misunderstood him the most. And today, as a church, we can still face that same danger if we see somebody who's coming to Jesus in a way that we don't understand. If we see somebody who's coming to Jesus while struggling with a sin that we believe to be unredeemable, we can stand between the hurting and Jesus. And so it's like we have to ask ourselves this question. Do we really believe that Jesus can change a person's life? Do we really believe that Jesus can redeem the brokenness in a person's life? If the answer to those questions are yes, then who in the world are we to stand between the hurting, the broken, and Jesus? Or how about this thought? What do you do when the thing standing between you and Jesus is everyone else? Maybe it's your spouse, your kids, your job. Maybe it's the way you were raised that you feel like Jesus is calling you to something new, but you don't want to go against the way that you were brought up. Maybe it's changes that you know you need to make, but you don't want to make because there are people that you don't want to disappoint. Because, yes, we can stand in the way of others in Jesus. And Jesus warns us against that all throughout his ministry, but we can also allow others or circumstances to stand between us and Jesus. But Bartimaeus teaches us, if you want to experience a breakthrough, you can't let the crowd control your cry. Then the third lesson is follow the one. Follow the one. This is my favorite part of Bartimaeus' story. It's the fact that after Jesus healed Bartimaeus, he literally got up and followed Jesus. As surprising as it might sound, this isn't a common story that you see throughout the Gospels. It isn't common whenever you read about Jesus healing somebody in the Gospels that they actually get up and follow Jesus. You have a demon-possessed man who wanted to follow Jesus, but Jesus told him no, that you need to go back home and tell of what the Lord has done for you. You had the bleeding woman who we talked about a few weeks ago, who she was affirmed by Jesus. You have the Samaritan woman who went and told her community about Jesus. You have the man born blind in John chapter 9 who ends up worshiping Jesus. You have one of the 10 lepers who comes back to give thanks to Jesus. But Bartimaeus, he leaves everything in order to follow Jesus. If most people got their sight back, they'd just be gone. They'd be running through the city, taking in everything they'd missed while living in total darkness. But Bartimaeus doesn't do that. He sees Jesus, and that's enough for him. And instead of chasing everything that he's been missing, he chooses to follow Jesus, even while that road leads to the cross. It's crazy whenever you look at early church traditions, and early church traditions will say that Bartimaeus, he didn't only follow Jesus to the cross, but he followed Jesus through the cross. He eventually became a leader in the early church in Jerusalem in the shadow of the cross. Bartimaeus didn't just get healed, he got moving. He doesn't just take the work of Jesus and move on with his life. He let the work of Jesus completely change the direction of his life. He follows Jesus. And that's the call for us too. We don't just experience Jesus. We aren't just forgiven by Jesus. We don't just reap the benefits of Jesus. We walk with and we stay with Jesus. Jesus asked his disciples, "What do you want me to do for you?" He asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" His disciples said, "We want power and honor and glory." Bartimaeus said he wants mercy and to see. What would you ask for? If Jesus came to you today and looked you in the eye and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" What would your answer be? Would it be, "Jesus, fix this"? "Jesus, make my life easier"? "Jesus, fix my finances, fix my marriage, fix my kids. Take away the pain, take away the stress, get me out of this situation"? Like, there's nothing wrong with any of those prayers. I think those are things that we should pray about. The disciples, they wanted something from Jesus. Bartimaeus just simply wanted Jesus. We all have an answer to this question. But are we trying to have Jesus elevate our lives? Or are we willing to just surrender and follow him? Jesus asked the question, but your response will determine if you want to receive from Jesus or if you want to follow Jesus. Jesus put it like this: seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And then all these things will be given to you as well. Stop for the one. Don't block the one. But also don't stop short of following Jesus. Will you pray for me today? Father in heaven, I thank you for today and just this time that we have to come and to hear your word. And I thank you so much for the story of Bartimaeus. And I know that it's a challenging story. But I pray that our hearts will align with where his heart was, Jesus, that we will come to you and that our requests will be so pure and so innocent. May we receive your mercy. May we receive your grace. But Jesus, we wouldn't just come to receive from you, but that we would follow you in response to what you've done for us. So God, I pray for every person in this room who has answers to that question. What would you have me do for you? I pray that it's not an answer in and of itself, but I pray that it's a doorway, a doorstep to following you. So Jesus, thank you for loving us. Thank you for making a way for us. In your name we pray. Amen.